I'd like to invite you all to stand up again because I think we're going to talk about energy. We really need to be a little bit energetic about it, don't we? So let's all stand up. I'll take my jacket off here. We'll get excited, huh? All right. So you don't have to stay standing, of course. So give it a stretch and sit down when you feel comfortable. All right. So it's getting dark here. It's getting evening. All that melatonin starting to get secreted. I want to talk about something a little brighter, shall we? I want to talk about a bright green biofuture. And it centers around a couple ideas, one of which is climate change and the other of which is energy. And so I'm going to channel Al Gore here for a minute, and we're going to look at a couple graphs. So I think this one you've seen before. I think this one you're aware of. This is global anthropogenic human-emitted CO2. And you can see it's been rising pretty steadily, actually at an exponential rate, since about 1800. And so we're all pretty much aware that human output of greenhouse gases is causing some problems. It's causing an increase in global mean temperatures. And most scientists agree that 2 degrees Celsius above global pre-industrial temperature levels would be catastrophic environmentally and for us, although we are part of the environment, as Jim Farrell likes to say. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we on track to deal with this crisis? Are we on track? Well, let's look at the United States. US total energy production is shown here since 1980 and broken down into different categories. And so you can see renewable energies at the top. That's that green bar. It's about 7% with another 1%, which is renewable biofuels. And you can see the rest is mostly fossil fuels with a little bit of nuclear power. Now let's project that out to 2035 based on our current policies. Renewable energy is set to increase as a fraction of our total energy production. And that's great. That's very good news. And the current policies we have in place are set to address the increase in our CO2 emissions. And we can see that if we look at historical CO2 emissions since 1990, holding between 5 and 6 billion metric tons of carbon a year. And that remains pretty steady through 2035, according to the Energy Information Administration, based on current policies. So we're actually doing a really good job of sort of curbing that increase that has been happening every year since we started industrializing. But that's still 5.5 billion metric tons of carbon every year. This is a problem, OK? Just because we've stopped the increase doesn't mean we're not still doing it. And so the problem still exists. But we're not even the problem. Ashana actually brought up the OECD. It's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And it includes a lot of the more developed countries in the world, like the United States, a lot of European countries, Japan, Korea, those folks. And then there's the non-OECD countries. So that's China and India, a lot of countries that are on their way to being developed. And this graph shows metric tons of carbon per year as a function of time. And you can see the non-OECD countries are set to triple their premillennial levels by 2035. So if you think we're doing something, great. We're not. And they're doing really nothing, OK? And so there's some problems here, all right? And so if we're really worried about climate, we need to be talking about not only ourselves, but the rest of the world. And this is something that wasn't taken into account in the first climate models. So let's look at some more recent climate models. This is scenario A. And scenario A takes into account a little bit of reduction on the part of the non-OECD countries after they peak in about 2025, and a more significant reduction by the OECD nations of about 2 to 3% per year. Now, if we follow this path, our chance of warming beyond 2 degrees Celsius, which is what scientists said would be the more catastrophic level of environmental global warming, is 88%. I think that probability is a little bit too high for comfort. So let's think about something else. What if tomorrow we stopped emitting carbon? Just stopped. Now, if we did that, and the non-OECD countries continued on their same path, peaked at 2025, and then reduced from there, our chance of warming beyond 2 degrees Celsius is still 50%. Flip a coin, and we've got catastrophic environmental consequences. So it's clear from this that even if we do everything in our power, it's not enough. Now, I like 50% better than 88%, but it's still not enough. And so what are we going to do about it? Well, I think there's a lot of things. And there's a lot of things that we've been doing. We've been driving Priuses. we've been connecting with the Earth, which is good. And we've been using CFL bulbs. All very good things. We've switched to metal water bottles now on campus, or we will. So that's all great. And so Alex Steffen is a blogger and an environmentalist, and he came up with sort of three groupings of philosophies about environmentalism that we're looking at in the next stage of environmentalism. And he breaks it down into these three colors: light green, dark green, and bright green environmentalism. And light green is the sort of individually driven change that we've been doing so far. And so that's often sort of the eco-consumer. This is lifestyle choices and lifestyle changes on the individual's part that change our environmental future. The dark green environmentalists are more looking at the community level. They're looking at reorganizing how people live. And so they're also rejecting sort of the modern industry and technology that's brought us to this point environmentally. And then there's the bright green environmentalists. And bright green environmentalists are really thinking about change on a systemic global level. We're looking at technology, innovation, and industry to fuel the next level of our more sustainable future. And so the argument there is that technology and industry have really had a rough patch, and it's been really rough. But if we press forward, we have the possibility of developing new technologies and innovating so that we don't see the future that is currently being projected. And so when we think about this future, to me, the only kind of change that is really going to do something as drastic as stopping carbon tomorrow is the kind of bright green approach that says we really need to change on a world scale, and we can use technology and innovation and industry and the systems that are in place to make other systems below them conform to a more sustainable future. So when we think about America, we think about agriculture, I think, because to me agriculture is really important. And we're really good at growing crops. And so our previous approach to sort of renewable energy has also focused on bioenergy. And so corn is something we're also really great at growing. If you've ever gone to your car, or gone to the pump and you've seen E85, you've probably put it in your car. It's 85% ethanol made from corn. And it's great. It's a domestic energy resource, but it has some problems associated with it, one of which is land use change and overall lack of net energy production. And so corn ethanol might not be the best choice. And if we used corn ethanol or soybeans for biodiesel, it would take over 500% of our global arable land to grow enough to replace our current energy needs. So it's clearly not an option. Well, you know, there's these other organisms. They're photosynthetic organisms. I just drank some. They're quite safe, and they're in all of those ponds and lakes that we see in the summer. And they're called algae. And algae are microscopic photosynthetic organisms that typically live in the water, and they're in everything from our lakes in the summer to the sushi rolls that you eat at the Japanese restaurant. And so algae are really important. And the other thing is algae are petroleum. The petroleum that we use in our cars today is made from algae. It's made from old dead algae that were compressed and have undergone geological processes to convert into long-chain hydrocarbons that are petroleum today. The other thing about algae is they've been around a long time, and they've done some really significant climatological things themselves. So the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Human civilization is about 10,000. We've been doing modern industry for about 250. And about 2.5 billion years ago, the algae sort of entered the stage. And they converted our atmosphere from one that was predominant in CO2 to one that was predominant in oxygen. And that allowed for aerobic organisms like us to exist. So we really have to thank the algae for making a nice, hospitable planet for us. And they also, in producing all of that oxygen, allowed for the methane in the atmosphere to be converted into CO2, which is a much less potent greenhouse gas. And that triggered a huge ice age. So if we think about affecting global change on a global level, let's think about how it worked in the past. Microorganisms. And so the remarkable thing about algae that's different from other creatures and other plants is that they have extremely high growth rates, and they also accumulate a lot of important molecules in their systems. And so you can see here, these are microscopic pictures of algae, and those big green blobs there, those are the green oil of the future. It's essentially fat. They store fat up in their systems, and then we can take that fat, extract it, and convert it into biodiesel fuel for our cars. And they grow at a remarkable rate. And so I mentioned that we would need over 500% of global arable land to produce soybeans to meet our energy needs. Algae would require 0.3%. So if we're thinking about global problems and global scale problems, we have to think about global scale solutions. Now, don't get me wrong, algae isn't necessarily the only technology available. There's a lot of technologies, but algae can be really interesting. If we think about the types of molecules that we have and types of things we have available to us in plentiful supply on this planet, water, carbon dioxide, well, we know about that one, solar energy, these are all in plentiful supply. And so if we add algae to that mixture, along with a little bit of sort of miracle grow, some nutrients, we get some really important things. We get oxygen and we get fuels. And these fuels can help us replace our energy infrastructure. But we can also get some other interesting things. Now, algae are actually quite expensive to produce. The production systems that are available for algae production cost a lot. And they may cost too much to currently produce at today's prices the kinds of fuels that we need. And so one of the ways you can deal with that is to couple that production with something that's much more valuable. What about pharmaceuticals? Pharmaceuticals are expensive. And so if we think, so there's a lab out at UC Berkeley that managed to engineer some E. coli and some yeast to produce an anti-malarial drug. And they greatly decreased the cost of production for that anti-malarial drug. And we can do that in algae too. And so if we think about global health and the problems of supplying all of these expensive and important pharmaceuticals, if we can couple that to a fuel, we can make that fuel less expensive by selling that extremely valuable product and also deal with global health. Well, if we're going to replace the petrochemical industry, we need to replace all of those petrochemicals in that supply chain. And so one of the things that algae can produce is plastics. And so we can use microorganisms like algae or algae themselves to produce plastic-type molecules that we can use to replace that huge petrochemical industry that supplies almost all of our materials today. And we can make other chemicals as well. And so the genetic revolution has really allowed us to access biology. And by accessing that biology, we can create designer organisms that do whatever we want. We might also be able to make some food out of it. So I had a little sip of the algae before. Now they're sitting in my stomach. Not so great for people. They don't really taste that good, and it sort of conjures up images of Soylent Green. But cattle could eat these. And so we can think about using algae, extra algae material that we've already extracted the oils and the pharmaceuticals from as a feedstock for animals and for food production. And so I just want to leave you with an image today of what the future might look like. And I really do mean what it might look like, because it's very important when considering environmentalism to consider all of the possibilities and also consider doing full analyses, they're called life cycle analyses, of all of the things that, that the production of this particular solution would have on the rest of the world. So I mentioned corn ethanol and land use change. You grow corn in the United States, and suddenly the demand increases, and they chop down rainforests in Brazil to plant more corn. Okay, so these are the kind of problems we need to think about. We need to think about algae and genetic engineering and whether these things can really work, if we can use these in a way that's environmentally responsible while we're using them to sort of help the environment help itself, right? And so this is sort of the image of the ideal algae culture. It's a field in the desert where nothing else would grow and no one else would be doing anything, full of algae, and their water source is actually wastewater. So they can grow on wastewater. They can absorb all of that nitrogen and phosphorus and use that as a growth medium, and so we can clean up our water. We can also couple that production with a CO2 coal-fired power plant. We can bubble those flue gases up through the algae, and they can absorb the CO2 and also clean up some of the noxious gases that are part of that, as well as the soot. And so what do we get out of that production system? Well, we get fuel for our cars. We get pharmaceuticals for public health, global health. We get plastics and other chemicals that we need to replace our growing petrochemical industry. And we might even get food out of it. And so this is my sort of picture for the bright green biofuture. It's bright because it's bright green because it's emphasizing world issues and global solutions. And it's a biofuture because it's reliant on microorganisms. And so if we think back to my original questions, we have to ask ourselves, are we on track? Well, no. And what are we going to do about it? Well, the answer is something big, maybe algae. Thank you.